When Trump said he wanted to buy Greenland in 2019, the media laughed at him. They called it absurd. They said it was a distraction. They mocked him for suggesting the United States could purchase a territory from Denmark in the 21st century. And then in 2025, he brought it up again. Except this time, he wasn't joking. He was dead serious. The media still doesn't understand what this is really about. They think it's about ego. They think it's about land. They think it's about Trump being Trump. They're wrong. This isn't about Greenland. This is about the next 50 years of global power. This is about rare earth minerals that China controls 90% of. This is about the Arctic becoming the most strategic piece of real estate on the planet. And this is about a resource war that's already started, but most people don't even know is happening. I'm going to show you what Trump actually sees when he looks at Greenland, and why this might be the most strategically brilliant move he's ever proposed, even if it sounds insane. Let's start with what Greenland actually is. Greenland is the world's largest island, 836,000 square miles, 80% covered in ice. Population: 56,000 people, mostly Inuit, mostly living on the coast. It's technically part of Denmark, but it's been autonomous since 1979. Denmark handles foreign policy and defense. Greenland handles everything else. And Greenland is broke. Their economy is almost entirely dependent on fishing and subsidies from Denmark. Denmark gives them about $600 million a year just to keep the island functioning. The median income in Greenland is about $33,000 a year. There's massive alcoholism, high suicide rates. It's a hard place to live. So when Trump offers to buy it, the initial reaction is, why would anyone want it? And that's the question that reveals everything. Let me show you a map. Not the map you're used to seeing. A resource map. Greenland sits on one of the largest deposits of rare earth minerals in the world. We're talking about neodymium, dysprosium, terbium, praseodymium. You've never heard of these elements, but your entire life depends on them. Every smartphone has rare earth minerals in it. Every electric car battery, every wind turbine, every precision-guided missile, every F-35 fighter jet, every advanced radar system. Modern technology does not work without rare earth minerals. And here's the problem. China controls 90% of the global supply. Not because they have 90% of the deposits. They don't. They have about 37% of the world's rare earth reserves. They control 90% because they're the only ones who invested in the refining infrastructure 30 years ago when everyone else thought it wasn't profitable. And now, China has a chokehold on the entire global tech supply chain. If China decided tomorrow to cut off rare earth exports to the United States, our economy would collapse within months. We couldn't build cars. We couldn't build phones. We couldn't build weapons. We would be completely dependent on China's goodwill. That's not a hypothetical. China has already used rare earth exports as a weapon. In 2010, they cut off Japan's supply during a territorial dispute. Japan caved immediately. And now, with tensions rising over Taiwan, over trade, over everything, the United States is sitting on a strategic vulnerability that could destroy us. Enter Greenland. Greenland has massive rare earth deposits. The Kvanefjeld deposit alone has enough rare earths to supply global demand for decades. There's uranium, there's zinc, there's lead, there's gold, there's iron ore. And here's the key. It's all accessible. Climate change is melting the ice sheet. Mining operations that were impossible 20 years ago are now feasible. Companies are already there. Australian companies, Chinese companies, Canadian companies. And that brings us to the real reason Trump wants Greenland. China is already there. In 2016, a Chinese company tried to buy an abandoned naval base in Greenland. Denmark blocked it under pressure from the U.S. In 2018, Chinese state-owned companies bid on contracts to build airports in Greenland. Denmark blocked those too, but China hasn't given up. They're just being more subtle. Chinese mining companies are partnering with Greenland's government. They're offering infrastructure investments. They're offering jobs. They're offering everything that Greenland desperately needs. And Greenland's government is listening. Because Denmark gives them $600 million a year, but China is offering billions in investment. Here's what nobody in the media is talking about. If China gains control of Greenland's rare earth supplies, the strategic balance of power in the 21st century is over. China would control the resources needed for all advanced technology. They could price the United States out of the electric car market. They could prevent us from building next-generation weapons systems. They could dictate terms on everything. This is not about ice and polar bears. This is about who controls the future. Now let me talk about the Arctic, because this is the second part of the strategy that nobody's discussing. Climate change is opening the Arctic. The Northwest Passage, which has been frozen and impassable for all of human history, is now navigable for several months a year. That's a sea route from Europe to Asia that cuts the distance by 40% compared to going through the Suez Canal. Whoever controls that route controls trillions of dollars in trade, and Greenland sits right in the middle of it. Russia knows this. They've been militarizing the Arctic for 15 years. New bases, new icebreakers, new submarines. They're claiming territory. They're preparing for the Arctic to become a major theater of conflict. China knows this. They're calling themselves a near-Arctic nation, even though they're nowhere near the Arctic. They're building icebreakers. They're investing in Arctic research. They're making moves. And the United States? We have one functioning heavy icebreaker. One. Russia has 40. We are completely unprepared for Arctic competition, and Greenland is the key to controlling the Arctic. If the United States owned Greenland, we would have a strategic position in the Arctic, control over the Northwest Passage, military bases closer to Russia than anything we currently have, access to resources that would break China's monopoly. It's not about buying land. It's about securing the next century of American power. Now, let me address the obvious question. Can you even buy Greenland? Legally? Yes and no. Greenland is autonomous. Denmark handles defense and foreign policy, but Greenland's government controls their own internal affairs. If Greenland's population voted for independence, and then voted to join the United States, it could happen. It would be messy. It would be controversial. But it's not impossible. The U.S. has done this before. We bought Alaska from Russia in 1867 for $7.2 million. Everyone thought that was crazy too. Called it Seward's Folly. Alaska turned out to have massive oil reserves. It's now one of the most strategically important states we have. We bought the Virgin Islands from Denmark in 1917 for $25 million. Territorial purchases are part of American history. This isn't unprecedented. The question is, would Greenland want to? Here's where it gets interesting. Greenland is poor. Really poor. They're dependent on Denmark for survival, but there's growing resentment. Young Greenlanders don't want to be a Danish territory. They want independence, but they know independence means economic collapse because they can't survive without Denmark's subsidies, unless someone else offered them a better deal. What if the United States offered Greenland's 56,000 residents the following: full U.S. citizenship, maintain local governance, and cultural autonomy. $50,000 per person cash payment, that's $2.8 billion. Total infrastructure investment of $100 billion over 10 years. Military bases that provide jobs and economic development. Access to S. Healthcare and education systems. For Greenland's population, that would be life-changing, transformational. For the United States, $103 billion is nothing. We spent $2 trillion. In Afghanistan, we spent $1.7 trillion on the F-35 program. Securing rare earth independence from China and Arctic dominance for $103 billion would be the greatest strategic investment in American history. Denmark would lose their territory, but honestly, they'd probably be relieved. Greenland costs them money and strategic headaches. If Greenland chose to leave, Denmark might secretly celebrate. Now let me talk about why this terrifies China. China's entire strategic position for the 21st century depends on three things. 1. Control of rare earth minerals to dominate technology. 2. Belt and Road Initiative, to control global trade routes. 3. Keeping the United States strategically contained. U.S. acquisition of Greenland destroys all three. If the U.S. develops Greenland's rare earth deposits, China loses their monopoly. American companies could supply the entire Western world. Europe would have an alternative to Chinese supply chains. China's leverage disappears overnight. If the U.S. controls Greenland, we control the Northwest Passage. That's a competing trade route to China's Belt and Road. That's European trade flowing through U.S. controlled waters instead of Chinese-influenced routes. And if the U.S. has military bases in Greenland, we're positioned between Russia and China with Arctic dominance. We're not contained. We're expanded. This is why Chinese state media went insane when Trump mentioned buying Greenland. They understand what this really means. And that's why Trump keeps bringing it up. He's signaling to China, I see what you're doing in the Arctic. I see your rare earth strategy, and I'm going to counter it. Let me address the criticism that this is neo-colonialism or imperialism. Is offering Greenland's population U.S. citizenship and massive investment colonialism? Or is it the best opportunity they've ever had? Greenland is currently a territory of Denmark. They're already not independent. The question is whether they'd rather be connected to Denmark with limited opportunities or connected to the United States with massive opportunities. If Greenland's population voted freely in a referendum to join the U.S., that's self-determination, not colonialism. And frankly, every major power is making moves in the Arctic right now. Russia is militarizing. China is investing. Norway is claiming territory. Canada is trying to assert control. The United States making a legal offer to Greenland's population is probably the most ethical way this could play out. The alternative is watching China slowly gain economic control through investments and resource deals, which is exactly what they're doing across Africa and Latin America right now. Now let me tell you what's happening behind the scenes that the media isn't covering. The U.S. already has a military presence in Greenland. Thule Air Base. It's been there since 1943. It's one of our most important early warning radar stations for detecting missiles from Russia. We've been investing in upgrading Thule. New radar systems, new infrastructure. We're not leaving. The U.S. has been quietly funding mining surveys in Greenland. We're mapping the resources. We know what's there. And here's the thing nobody's talking about. Greenland's government is more open to this than Denmark is. There have been quiet discussions. Nothing official, nothing public. But the idea isn't as crazy to Greenland's leadership as the media pretends. Because Greenland wants independence, they just need a path to economic viability. The U.S. could provide that path. Denmark is the obstacle. Because if Greenland joins the U.S., Denmark loses their claim to Arctic territory and resources. But Denmark is a small country. They can't stop Greenland if Greenland wants to leave. Legally, they have no mechanism to prevent it. Let me paint you a picture of what this looks like in 10 years, if it happens. Greenland becomes a U.S. territory, like Puerto Rico, but with way better terms. massive infrastructure investment, modern airports, upgraded ports, roads, high-speed internet. Mining operations develop the rare earth deposits. American, Canadian, and European companies, not Chinese. Jobs for Greenlanders, royalties for the Greenland government. Military expansion at Thule, new Arctic bases, Coast Guard presence. We become the dominant Arctic power overnight. The Northwest Passage becomes a U.S.-Canadian joint operation. Secure shipping routes, environmental protection, search and rescue capability. Greenland's population gets access to opportunities they never had. Their kids can go to American universities. They can move to the mainland if they want. They maintain their culture and language, but with economic security. And strategically, the United States just secured resource independence from China and Arctic dominance for the next century. For $100 billion. That's less than we spend on defense in 2 months. Now, is this actually going to happen? I don't know. The political obstacles are enormous. The diplomatic complications are real. Denmark would have to be managed carefully. Greenland's population would have to want it. But here's what I do know. Trump mentioning this twice, years apart, means it's not a joke. It means someone in the U.S. strategic planning apparatus has looked at this seriously. It means the rare earth supply chain vulnerability is real. The Arctic competition is real. The China threat is real. And Greenland is the solution to all 3 problems at once. The media thinks this is about Trump's ego. They're focused on the spectacle of buying Greenland like it's a real estate deal. They're missing the forest for the trees. This is about the next 50 years of global competition. This is about who controls the resources that power modern civilization. This is about Arctic dominance in a warming world. And when you understand what's actually at stake, buying Greenland doesn't sound crazy at all. It sounds like the most strategically important move the United States could make this decade. So next time you see a headline mocking Trump for talking about Greenland, remember, they don't understand what they're looking at. They think it's about land. It's about power. They think it's about the present. It's about the future. They think it's impossible. History will decide if they're right. Comment below. Do you think the U.S. should pursue Greenland? Is this strategic genius or impossible fantasy? I want to hear your take. See you in the next one.